Happy Labor Day weekend. This is Bob Irwin here from Fired Up. Today we're running some of our favorite segments from some recent shows. If you would like to check out the radio show, we have a show that's on live on KDWN 720 AM Talk Radio from 4 to 6 p.m. on Sunday. You can talk to us live on that program if you tune in. Again, KDON 720 AM radio on your dial. Thanks for tuning in. We are back here on Fired Up. I'm your host, Bob Irwin, back with my panel. Randy Sutton from the Metro Police Department, Emily Miller from the gun store, Michael Giles, lawyer from Creed and Giles, and Tony D., our gunsmith firearms instructor guy. In the previous shows, we get a lot of questions about home defense and what type of gun should I have, what type of weapon should I have. And this really came to mind for doing something on this show because I just a few days ago got a question from a guy who called to say that he had a M1 carbine with a bayonet and wanted to know if it was appropriate if somebody broke into his house to stab him with the bayonet. And I said, well, you don't have ammunition for it? And he said, no, I have a 30-shot clip. But, you know, if I want to really convince people they shouldn't break in my house, if I stab them a couple of times, that'll really show them where it's at. It gave me some insight to maybe we need to talk a little bit about firearms for the house, other weapons for the house, which, ladies and gentlemen, would not include bayonets at the top of the list.
It would justify Dianne Feinstein's ban on bayonet lugs, you know, I mean, yes.
I can just see the lawsuit coming that you maimed my client by stabbing him in the eye with a bayonet. Self-defense is self-defense. If you need to defend yourself, you need to defend yourself. That one just has a lot of interesting things to it. We have, in general, rifles, shotguns, pepper sprays, tasers, baseball bats, anything, weapons at hand are always appropriate if somebody is trying to bash your brains in or rape you or something. There are lots of choices and lots of expert opinions in this. But I'm going to try and get our panel to weigh in on this a little bit from their experiences and where it goes. Emily, I'm going to start with you. Frequently we get customers that have make the statement they really don't want to kill anybody, and I honestly don't think anybody really wants to kill anybody.
The bayonet guy might.
The bayonet guy would be the exception. I think that's where he'd lose his case. But that was just a bizarre phone call, and it'll take me weeks to get over it. Anyway,
very
we're.
I don't have a bayonet.
When that call came in, ladies and gentlemen, I asked an attorney who laughed. So that was the response of the legal community. People who want non-lethal,
yes.
What do you suggest to them?
Well, there's a couple of things. If you can't take your gun someplace, because we flat out know there are places you cannot take a gun. I have a taser and I have a knife, and I take my taser everywhere. It's pink, it's quite adorable, and I always feel safe with it because if I can't take a gun into a bar, or sometimes I might have a glass of wine or two.
Really?
And I don't want to, yeah, I know, it's happening. Crazy, right? Italian, it's very strange. I sometimes worry about, okay, can I have my gun on me? Am I over the legal limit? I'm not driving anywhere, but can I have my gun? And there's a lot of places where they just don't, I don't want to mess with that, or it's posted, I can't take it. So I carry my taser. And I feel like if it can drop a 2,700-pound bull in a second, I'm all right with the crazy guy that might be following me to my car. I feel very safe. I actually did pull it out. I was followed to my car by 4 guys. My boyfriend at the time and I were followed. I was actually at a local shopping area, and I pulled my taser out, and they didn't know what it was, but I pulled it out, and it was menacing enough that they left. So
far, so good.
I'm really
100%.
tough. I'm really tough.
And tasers are generally non-lethal. We get a lawsuit once, twice a year where someone dies after being hit with a taser, but it's very, very rare.
I had a woman come in the store a few years ago that she'd been brutally raped. Black eye, broken nose, and she wanted to buy a gun. And after I talked to this woman for about 5 minutes, I realized that she should not own a gun. And I said, if this happens to you again, you may end up shooting and killing the person that did this. And she said, absolutely not. She goes, I could not take a human life. I said, really? I says, you couldn't shoot the guy who beat and raped you. She
Even
goes,
at the
absolutely
expense
not.
of her own.
Right. And she says, I said, what do you want a gun for? She goes, insurance. I said, insurance? I said, what happens if you can't pull the trigger when you have to? That gun is going to be taken away from you and used against you. And she says, I never thought of that. And we ended up selling her a taser. Yeah, so it worked good.
In this debate, I'm going to be the guy who votes for handguns as the home defense weapon. They are easier to manipulate in smaller areas. Generally, the attacker is very, very close. A lot of marksmanship isn't required. But I found that that's what I end up recommending to everybody. And I think police, even when they do home searches, are generally better off with handguns in close quarters than they are with rifles. My opinion, small enough to hide and keep it near the door. Tony, I know we've talked that shotguns certainly have the scary advantage, and they always end the fight.
The Remington Vegematic.
Immediately.
It slices it, dices it, mangles it, murders. The Remington Vegematic. I've investigated 7 shootings with shotguns. All 7 of them were one-shot stops. Bang, down. 5 of them were homicide. Bang, dead. It's very hard for a very frail mammal that we are to remain upright after taking 1 ounce of lead ripping through our frail little bodies. The scare factor, you hearing that rack rack in the middle of the night, believe me, there's nothing more frightening than that. It's the universal translator. Go away, right? And another thing, we had a little old lady in CCW class several years ago. She was so weak she couldn't pull the slide back on any semi-auto. She couldn't pull the double action on any revolver. We didn't know what to do with her. We ended up selling a little 20-gauge Mossberg pump, and this little old lady turned into Rambette. Boom, boom, boom. Right on Metro responded. She got 2 guys broke into her house. She barricaded herself in her upstairs bedroom. She got on the phone. She was talking to Metro, and you hear the guys ransacking the house. They're upstairs. They're trying to bed. She goes, I got a shotgun in here. Rack, rack. Gone. That's it. Nothing like a shotgun.
Lieutenant, Metro, like most modern departments now, carry rifles rather than shotguns. In my area, they all carry shotguns. We've gone to rifles. Looking at the rifle as a home defense tool.
Inappropriate. Rifles are carried by most police departments now, in addition to shotguns, not instead of, because they're really for 2 different types of encounters. A rifle is only appropriate for home defense if you're defending the Alamo. For home defense, you want to have something that's quick, that you can get to in a hurry, because these things happen in a heartbeat often, and the ballistics of a rifle are that if you miss, that bullet that is going to go far and away further than if it was a pistol bullet. So it really is not an appropriate thing unless you are a superbly trained commando that keeps your AR-15 by your bed and is ready to rock and roll with it. I don't think it's an appropriate home defense weapon.
I'd have to agree. And the other thing with handguns is I see the long guns, shotguns, and rifles being very difficult in close quarters. If you wake up and the guy's in your bedroom, I mean, the civilians that come in, they say the guy's going to be down the hall when you wake up. I said, no, he isn't. He's going to be standing over your bed with the hatchet when you wake up. So you need something you can get quicker. It was actually made about Michael Giles here. What I want to ask you, Michael, we all realize people can use deadly force in defense.
Right.
Have you ever had the case, because we've had people ask, if I shoot this guy 6 times with my .44 Magnum, am I going to get sued over that when somebody says we use too much force?
Well, sued over it isn't the real concern. Would you be prosecuted because of it's a bigger concern? I fully anticipate that the vast majority of defensive shootings will result in some kind of a lawsuit, and the caliber, the type of the firearm, your skill level is always going to come into that. But I've seen actual prosecutions where the prosecutor said, this had to be homicide because you used hollow point bullets or because you used a .44 Magnum. I'm familiar with, we recently had the Zimmerman trial that I know, everybody watched. They made a big deal out of, there was a round in the chamber. Well, that's asinine. Everybody knows you carry a self-defense firearm, it's useless if it's not loaded. But they made an issue of it, and they're hoping that it played with the jury.
So there's no serious danger using a shotgun to defend yourself. But before we end this, seriously, How about a bayonet?
If it's the only tool you have, fine. It shouldn't be your primary option.
Are you able to protect your loved ones? We at the Gun Store have been helping Las Vegas residents equip themselves with home defense and personal safety products for over 25 years. We carry a full line of self-defense options, and our CCW Concealed Firearms Permit class is free. Our other classes include Ladies Self-Defense and free Children's Gun Safety class. Our indoor range is open 7 days a week for you to try out some options and shoot a real machine gun. The Gun Store, located at 2900 East Tropicana Avenue.
Jeans Locksmith has been servicing Las Vegas and Henderson for 40 years. We're family owned and operated and provide 24-hour emergency residential, commercial, and automotive solutions. Instead of replacing, we can fix your problem, from key duplication to computer key programming. We have a wide variety of products, including the largest key selection, state-of-the-art security accessories, and safes by American Securities. Every team member carries their sheriff's card, so you can trust us when it matters most. Come to the castle. Jeans Locksmith. Call us at 566-4363.
Happy Labor Day weekend. This is Bob Irwin from the Fired Up Show. Hope you enjoy our show today. We're running some of our favorite segments from our previous shows. This weekend we are on live on radio on KDWN 720 AM on your dial. It's a live call-in gun talk show. If you'd like to listen in or call us, we will be there. KDWN 720 AM from 4 to 6 p.m. on Sunday. Thanks for tuning in. And we are back here on Fired Up. We're going to talk about in this section a little bit about the state of Colorado in a couple of aspects. They've been running into some new interesting stuff with their gun laws they put through. A couple of their senators are now being recalled. The governor is being yelled at. And many of the sheriffs have banded together to not enforce part of the new Colorado state law that the governor just signed. First, I want to do a little comedy thing about that, actually. This group called Together Colorado had to cancel a gun buyback program at the request of the Bounty County Sheriff. His name is Joe Pelly, who says the new Colorado gun law will not allow him, or will make it very difficult to do a gun buyback. It seems the computer system that in the sheriff's office to do the gun buys cannot be used. The computer's not portable and so forth. Or perhaps the sheriff doesn't want all these people with their bizarre guns they're trying to get rid of or give away wandering into his police department. But the new law requires that any gun transactions are required to go through licensed dealers. And they get a background check, and the dealer gets a $10 fee for doing the background check. The organizers of this gun buyback, who are going to be handing in the guns, aren't a dealer. So they can't legally receive guns on the gun buyback, and the sheriff can't either because he's part of the state. He doesn't have a gun license either. No dealer in the area was willing to be the anti-gun dealer who was going to collect all these guns. So the buyback program they'd advertised for weeks and weeks just stopped. It's just so nice to see an anti-gun group trip over their own gun law that they just put through.
But I love gun buyback programs. I think they're a great, because I know somebody who went to a gun show and bought a whole shoebox full of old broken break top revolvers and paid $50 for like 6 or 8 of them. And then this unscrupulous person went to a gun buyback thing and got $50 a piece. They got $50 a piece for all of these broken.
And the LA County Sheriff paid you how much for these guns?
It was really. And
they do that. I saw a picture of one actually the LA County just did down in Barstow, and they had a picture of a box of guns on their website, and there were several BB guns and things that weren't worth. Anyway, so if you want to get rid of an old gun, wait for the gun buyback and give it to them, and they'll give you money. The bad part of this law is it went through July 1, and it limited magazine capacity of any gun in Colorado to 15 rounds. It didn't allow the old magazines to still exist. So the problem is that anybody who owns a magazine that holds 16 rounds which is a lot of the stuff that currently comes out, that what we call standard capacity magazines, has to modify them to permanently limit them to 15 rounds, or it's a crime to possess it.
Yep.
So they want the sheriffs to go around and check people to see if they've got 16 rounds in their magazine.
Because they have nothing else to do. Yeah. Clearly.
And actually, they charge them with a crime for doing that.
Well, at least it's 16. You know, in New York, it's 7. I mean,
It's
I just
7,
came back from the
so-
People's Republic over there. It was
Well,
an
you know, but
interesting
you can carry
concept.
2 guns in New York. Then,
that's right.
You know, 7 and
each.
7 is 16. Never mind.
In New York?
Randy bought it. Anyway, so we have this crime, and with the Colorado sheriffs being more serious about this than I am, obviously, there are 64 county sheriffs in Colorado. 64. 54 of them signed on to a lawsuit against the state for infringement of rights, wanting to block this action that was signed by Governor Hickenlooper back in March. It went into effect on the 1st of July. So we've got 44 sheriffs, 54 sheriffs that are, whatever the number
You're
is.
confusing me.
That I'm confusing myself right now.
A lot
that
of them.
are suing over the violation of the Second Amendment in Colorado, that they refuse to enforce it. So this is where the big issue comes, because you've got 54 county sheriffs refusing to enforce a Colorado state law.
And they're elected, so the governor has no power over them. I presume that the state could bring some kind of an action against them for failure to enforce the law, but ultimately it's up to the voters. And I doubt immensely that these 54 sheriffs, who are the rural counties, by the way, the only sheriffs that are willing to do this are in the big population centers around Denver, Aspen, and Boulder that want this. The rest of them, it's a foolish law that they cannot effectively enforce. And several of them come right out, like you said, and said, it's just a flat violation of the Second Amendment, and I won't be party to that. I took an oath to the Constitution, and I'm going to uphold it. It'll be interesting to see in the courts how this works out.
Absolutely, and you know, this is really to place the law enforcement officers in the middle of this debacle. To me, is morally reprehensible, because if you enact immoral laws and expect your law enforcement officers to fulfill them, you're putting them in a very difficult position. I go back to history, and history teaches us many lessons. Think of the police officers that were part of the Weimar Republic in Germany, who suddenly are given a set of laws once the Nazi regime comes into power, and starts enacting laws which they knew were absolutely wrong. Who's required to enforce them? The police officers. And there were many that decided to leave the country because they were forced to do something that they knew was wrong. And this is the same thing here. And yet they are legally responsible to enforce the laws that are enacted. And there's the moral conundrum right there.
It's catch-22. They feel their officers are wasting their time going around. They see a citizen with a Glock pistol that might have 16 rounds in the magazine, so they're going to do a stop and frisk and count the bullets in his magazine.
That's illegal.
And
Probable cause? Probable cause?
What's the PC for the stop
really.
to search the guy? And he's not doing anything wrong. I mean, if he's committing a crime,
This is where
you're going to arrest him for having 1 round.
we make criminals out of citizens, and to do that, to take a law-abiding citizen, enact an unjust law, and then label them a criminal because of political expediency and because of knee-jerk reactions to a violent crime, to me, shows a real lack of justice. But that's just my opinion.
The
All I heard is Colorado's run by Nazis. That's all I got from his story. That's all I took from that. So.
Well, the government is. I bet the rest of them, the sheriffs are the people that are trying to keep this thing, because their argument is, of course, that the left is arguing, well, 15 rounds is too many, and that's plenty for anybody, and you don't need more than 15 rounds to hunt a deer and that sort of crap they come up with. But the problem is, if they made it 15 rounds as a compromise. Originally, the bill said 10 rounds.
10 rounds.
So even at the 15, you've got dealers that are sitting on hundreds and thousands of dollars worth of magazines they can't legally transfer to anybody.
And look what companies in Colorado, Magpul, who makes all those magazines.
Not anymore. They moved.
Well, for the rest of the country.
Not anymore, Monty.
But the sheriffs are going through, and in this lawsuit, they just lined up and were making statements that they're not filing the suit for themselves, but one officer said, Sheriff, Weld County, said, but for single moms, the handicapped, the elderly, and others who need all the rounds they could have in their magazine because they can't physically operate. We just talked about somebody crashing into somebody's house. This is the real people. We've got a guy in a wheelchair who can't reload his gun because the one arm doesn't work, and we're going to tell him he can't have his 17 rounds in his SIG pistol.
Yeah, but we don't. I don't even think we should have to get down to hey, it's because of a disabled guy. Let's just talk about basic common sense, and get the political garbage out of it. And that's what this is all about. This is all about politics.
Oh, it absolutely is. When we had this in New York, you'll remember what we used to call New York magazines, Tony.
The New York Reload.
when the transit police in New York adopted Glocks, they thought, the administrator thought that 17 rounds was too many. And some other administrator thought, well, they should only have 12. And they compromised on 14 rounds, and they made, just for the New York Transit Police, magazines that held 14 rounds. Because if they had 17, my God, they could run crazy. These are cops. We don't want to give them 17 rounds, so we gave them 14. What are they thinking that's going to do?
Bob,
have anything to do with crime?
Just last week, I had a Honolulu retired police officer come in the store looking for 10-round mags for his Smith & Wesson 659. And I said, well, what happened? He said, he just retired, and for all of these years in Hawaii, he's carried 15-rounders. And when he retired, they took his 15-rounders away from him. He had no magazines for his gun. He's trying to buy 10-rounders because that's all he could have nowadays. Did 30 years with the police department. He's okay. Day he retires, pull them magazines.
Take 5 rounds away from him because he might hurt somebody.
The thing behind this is that it's a control issue, not nearly as much as a effective issue. Governments tend to try and control. Randy will remember this, when AR-15s became fairly common with law enforcement, in our own agency there was a debate over whether or not officers should be able to have magazines for their ARs with more, it was 15 or 20 rounds, even if they could hold 30 rounds. And there was a debate going on for quite some time before somebody finally said, why do we allow them to carry 5 magazines for their handgun, but we limit them to 20 rounds in an AR magazine? This is asinine. And I think it was really just the nature of governmental control. We want to control what people do, not because it's dangerous, but because we don't agree with it.
Right, and that's exactly right. This is government overreach once again, and we're seeing more and more of it in every branch of government. And now, but when you're talking about the safety of the public.
Well, and it's vital to remember that all of the gun control legislation that occurred this year, whether Connecticut, here, the attempts here in Nevada, or in Colorado, was basically spearheaded out of New York City by Mayor Bloomberg. Right. He and his organization have been pushing this. He wants to push this. He has the resources to push this. And I'm not sure the people of Colorado knew what was happening when they came in and pushed this bill through. I think they've woken up. I think it's going to cost some political careers.
Well, there's 2 of them going to be recalled on September 10th because they got enough more people signed up for the recall to vote against them than voted in the whole state of Colorado in the real election.
Beautiful.
Wow.
So
beautiful. That makes me happy.
We're so glad.
Finally.
We're going to break here for some commercials. We'll be back in just a few. Don't go away.
Are you tired of the same old routine? It's time to shake things up with a visit to the Pro Gun Club of Las Vegas. Located just 25 minutes from the Strip, Pro Gun Club offers 160 acres of space, featuring skeet shooting, rifle and handgun ranges. It's a great place to practice, and safety is always #1. Come anytime and enjoy the ground, or ask about our membership. The Pro Gun Club is a great place to celebrate and respect your Second Amendment right. Spice up your leisure time with the Pro Gun Club. Call us at 293-2108 today.
Happy Labor Day weekend. This is Bob Irwin here from Fired Up. Today we're running some of our favorite segments from some recent shows. If you would like to check out the radio show, we have a show that's on live on KDWN 720 AM Talk Radio from 4 to 6 p.m. on Sunday. You can talk to us live on that program if you tune in. Again, KDON 720 AM radio on your dial. Thanks for tuning in. And we are back here on Fired Up. With me right now is Miochelle Fiore, an assemblywoman from Las Vegas, and she was the driving force behind the campus carry bill that was in our assembly last year that unfortunately was defeated. As some listeners may not know, some viewers may not know, you're not allowed to carry your firearm, your concealed firearm that is legal. You're not allowed to carry it on campuses of the higher education system in Nevada because a few bureaucrats think that you're better off, I guess, being an unarmed victim. But Miochelle was trying to change that. And Miochelle, I want you to just tell everybody kind of what happened, and we'll talk about that bill a little bit.
Okay, so AB, first of all, Bob, thank you so much for having me on your show. This is a really nice pleasure. AB 143, don't forget, was brought forth last session in our 2011 session by Senator John Lee, who's now the mayor of North Las Vegas. And with AB 143, it basically allows concealed weapons permit carriers to carry their firearm on campus. The thing that is most disturbing, when you have a concealed weapons permit and you are actually carrying concealed, no one knows you have a firearm. You're not brandishing your firearm. You have it on you and you're quiet about it. You don't go, hey, I have a firearm. You just don't advertise that you have a firearm on you. So as after this session, because we're researching it now, because of course we're going to bring it forth for the next session, we found that under Richard Bryan, that governor of ours, very against guns, I'll just say, implemented a lot of laws and enacted those laws January of 1989. That is when our concealed weapons permit was written in the NAC, which are our Nevada administration codes, on our school property. So our gun rights have been dwindling away under the governorship of Bryan.
Well, what I don't understand, Miochelle, is we have people here who have all had background checks, they've been fingerprinted, they've been trained, they've gone through all sorts of state testing to make sure they can shoot straight and they're level-headed and all this sort of thing. Why do people in the assembly that are voting on this have a problem with honest citizens carrying guns to protect themselves? It makes no sense to me that the Second Amendment stops at the edge of UNLV's campus, for instance.
I question that myself a lot, and what I see is there's a hidden agenda, a gun control hidden agenda. The one main area that makes no sense to me, and no matter how many times you ask the question, you communicate, you negotiate with your fellow peers about firearms, is they do not have an answer with law-abiding citizens, as you and I are. We abide the law, so we carry our concealed weapons permit, we carry our registration for the weapons that we carry. When you have a bad guy, someone that's not going to abide the law, that person's going to bring a gun to campus, as they did at UNR to Amanda Collins. And remember, Amanda Collins was there with Senator Lee, and she was there with me fighting for this bill. Amanda Collins was a concealed weapons permit carrier. She had her concealed weapons permit. She was denied by UNR the privilege of carrying it. She was raped at gunpoint. And understand, while she was raped next to a campus police car and saw the campus police door like 50 feet away from her as she's being raped on the concrete with a gun to her head, she was denied the right to protect herself. However you slice it or dice it, when a college campus denies me the right to protect myself, they should be responsible for cases like that.
They are. In my mind, they have a duty then to protect you. Like when I was in police work, if we took somebody prisoner and locked him in handcuffs, we're responsible for his well-being because he can no longer defend himself. We can get sued if he gets hurt. And the same thing should apply. I know I talked to the police chief at UNLV several times, and talking to Enrique is like talking to a brick. He just says, no, my officers will protect everyone on campus. And when I discussed it with him, and an attorney discussed it with him, he said at any given time they have at least 3 officers on UNLV's campus. That's 51 acres they're covering.
Right.
And you can't possibly get a police response to help anybody from a rape, robbery, or anything else. And yet he says, being an ex-New York cop, that civilians shouldn't be having guns on college campuses because it destroys the educational environment if there are guns there.
Yeah,
so meanwhile, people get robbed and raped.
Exactly, and beat up, and yes.
That kind of destroys the educational environment even more, I would think.
Well, it's scary to me that people such as the officer that you mentioned feels in his mind he has the authority to take my rights away. And the really sad part with the state of Nevada Constitution is our Second Amendment in the state of Nevada is stronger than the U.S. Second Amendment Constitution.
Yes.
So our state constitution says we can carry. Now, UNLV is also, understand, they get a lot of taxpayer dollars on those campuses. So all of a sudden, a lot.
Yes.
So all of a sudden, they believe that they can dictate to us, the students, the taxpayers, what we can and cannot do. Personally, as a female, if my life is in question, I don't think I would allow any authority to dictate to me whether I have the right to protect myself or not. If the case comes up and I have to protect myself on a college campus and wind up defending myself with a firearm, I think that I might be okay with taking that, let's say, in front of the DA Wolfson. And because Wolfson has stated before, if your life is in danger and you fire in your self-protection, he would not prosecute. So let's hope that it doesn't come to that. However,
he would not prosecute, but the law shouldn't be there anyway.
I concur.
You cannot
I
carry
concur.
on a public place where UNLV in particular is in a very high crime rate area. They have all sorts of crime surrounding that campus.
I did the whole map on that.
I know, it's, again, like talking to a brick. Hopefully next session
we can approach it with more of a legal status, as far as the NAC cannot supersede the NRS or the state constitution. So basically, the people that are dictating that concealed weapons permit carriers cannot carry on our universities, on our state universities. They might as well just erase that because it won't stand up in court.
They don't have the authority.
They do not have the authority. Our college campuses, in my opinion, they do not have the authority to dictate to us whether we can carry our concealed fire permit when our state constitution supersedes their Nevada administration codes, their NACs. So this is how I'm going to approach this next session, more on a legal code standard versus the NRS comparing to the NACs. And you just can't dictate by a panel of liberal anti-gun individuals dictating to us what we can do.
And hopefully a few more pro-gun people in the legislature next time around.
I have to, and I concur with that. We're working diligently on that. I'll tell you, though, we do have Democrats as well as Republicans that are okay with
Well,
firearms.
I understand. It's really a nonpartisan
Yeah.
issue because nobody wants to get robbed and raped. Even the Democrats don't want their wives robbed and raped on the campuses of our universities.
Well, the
So-
chancellor who's in charge of all this, we asked him that question, in private. We said, if your wife gets raped, you're still not going to allow her to carry a gun on your campus? And you know what he said? Nope. And I'm like, okay, well, thank God I'm not married to you.
What a guy.
What a guy.
We'll be back after the break. We're going to have some other stuff going on here on Fired Up. I thank you, Michelle, for coming in and talking about that, and we will make this a big issue next time around.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Bob.
Thanks for being here.
Yep, absolutely.
Are you able to protect your loved ones? We at the Gun Store have been helping Las Vegas residents equip themselves with home defense and personal safety products for over 25 years. We carry a full line of self-defense options, and our CCW concealed firearms permit class is free. Our other classes include ladies self-defense and free children's gun safety class. Our indoor range is open 7 days a week for you to try out some options and shoot a real machine gun. The Gun Store, located at 2900 East Tropicana Avenue.
Happy Labor Day weekend. This is Bob Irwin from the Fired Up Show. Hope you enjoy our show today. We're running some of our favorite segments from our previous shows. This weekend we are on live on radio on KDWN 720 AM on your dial. It's a live call-in gun talk show. If you'd like to listen in or call us, we will be there. KDWN 720 AM from 4 to 6 p.m. on Sunday. Thanks for tuning in. We are here today again on Fired Up. I'm your host, Bob Irwin, from the Gun Store here in Las Vegas. This show is all about guns, politics, and self-defense issues that come to affect everybody every day. My guest panel today includes Tony D., our gunsmith and a firearms trainer here at the Gun Store, Attorney Michael Giles with Creed & Giles here in Las Vegas, our marketing and wedding manager, Emily Miller, here from the Gun Store, and Randy Sutton, who is a retired police officer here in Las Vegas, written several books, and you can find his books, if you'd like, at thelegacychallenge.com. Okay, in this segment on Fired Up, we're going to talk about the state of New Jersey predominantly because we have two gigantic cases in the state of New Jersey that will seriously affect the rights of firearm owners and concealed weapon holders or people that would like to carry concealed tremendously. We have one that's a state case where we have 4 gentlemen trying to change the state law, and we have another that's a federal case that's been in the hopper since 2010 that is about to go from the appellate court to the U.S. Supreme Court. And Michael, if I can ask you to at least start in on the state case. This is pretty complicated stuff, but it is so important to what you're going to find in your future if you're a gun owner.
The important thing to remember about New Jersey is, as one of the older states in the Union, their gun laws have been around for a very long time. The law that's under challenge in the state case goes back to 1924. Their original gun laws were in 1905, and they were mirrored by the New York laws. In 1924, the law was changed in New Jersey to say that the only people who needed to carry firearms were those with a justifiable need.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Well,
what does that mean? You have to.
The law has been construed for the last 50 years to mean justifiable need means an imminent threat of danger. And they would tell you that just walking down the street where you might get mugged is not imminent enough. Basically, when the New Jersey courts have ever looked at this particular issue, what they've said is, were you recently mugged? Is there a credible and verifiable threat to your life? This is so off the charts. In 1968, the law was challenged because a couple of private investigators who did some, pretty cop-like things were denied the right to carry firearms because every day they weren't in danger necessarily.
Oh, you have to be a victim in order to protect
Basically,
yourself.
in fact,
Exactly.
the law itself is very strict. Randy, I know that you're from New Jersey, you've worked in New Jersey. It's so strict that even when police officers retire, they may or may not be able to carry a firearm, depending on whether they can carry under the police officer's rights. But if they try to get a permit, they're told, well, you know, the threat to you is now stopped. What's happened here is these 4 individuals have filed a lawsuit in state court. Now, recently, the United States Supreme Court codified that the Second Amendment applies to the states through the 14th Amendment through the cases of Heller and then later on McDonald. And that's going to be very important because until the McDonald decision said states have to play on an even field with the federal government, they could refuse to act on Second Amendment claims because it wasn't part of their body of law. Now that it is, they have to address it, and the state Supreme Court has agreed in New Jersey to hear this appeal. Now, what they'll do with it is anybody's guess.
I have a guess.
But in the last 45 years, they've basically shuffled this off, just like the United States Supreme Court did all those years from the beginning, back in the earliest Supreme Court case in the 20s and 30s, all the way up to 2008 when the Heller decision actually was being kind of warped around.
Didn't this come from like the gangster laws, the old gangster laws basically with
that's the argument.
Justifiable need? Yeah.
The argument was that New Jersey was a civilized place except for certain people.
Right.
Unfortunately, and we see this in a lot of laws all over the country, that when this particular statute was written, it probably only applied to those people the political in-crowd wanted it to apply to. If you were a business owner in 1924, 1928, 1935, I'm sure you could go to the mayor and get a carry permit. It only became later in the 60s and 70s when it became a big bludgeon that was used against anybody that wanted to defend themselves outside of the house.
So it was a good old boy system back then, and it's evolved into a more stringent good old boy system now.
It really has. And I know we recently talked about a case where somebody passing through New Jersey got into trouble with some guns in the car, and unfortunately, their law is now, since Chicago and has gotten on the bandwagon, and they've got a fairly decent carry permit system mapped out. We don't know how that's going to shake out. Now, the 3 most stringent are New York City, the state of New Jersey, and the District of Columbia. And this is going to be the next big battleground. This state case is likely to change the format of what we see back there.
What I'm seeing here, Michael, is when I went through the case, the state constitution in New Jersey has no gun rights in it. It has nothing even mentioning it. There's no equivalent of the Second Amendment, or stricter or not, there is no constitutional right to have a gun in New Jersey.
Right, and remember, when all of the states formed their own constitutions, under the 10th Amendment, the federal government was hands-off. The states had a right to form whatever laws they wanted, and New Jersey was one of those states that was on the outs in the whole Second Amendment argument. In fact, the Second Amendment as we know it wasn't a unanimous decision by the founding colonies and put into law. And New Jersey was one of the ones that kind of fought against that, and when they formed their own constitution, they put no gun rights into their constitution. They also have no right, as I understand it, they don't have any version of a stand your ground type law. They have a requirement that you make reasonable efforts to avoid the conflict.
And here's how that practically affects people. Having been a law enforcement officer in New Jersey for 10 years, I saw some very archaic things take place because of these gun laws, including I was actually forced to arrest a man who was passing through the state of New Jersey. His car broke down, and an auto mechanic saw a gun in the trunk of his car when he went into the man's trunk. It was a weapon that had been given to him by the President of the United States in gratitude for service to his country. We were forced to arrest him for carrying a concealed weapon in the trunk of his car because of these laws. And talk about trying to, how do you, I mean, I was unfortunately the officer who was ordered to arrest him. And quite honestly, you know, watching what I consider to be an innocent man be led away in handcuffs after all that he did for his country was, to me, an insult. And it was, but that's the practical effect of these laws.
And the laws aren't much better. In 1971, Justice Nathan Jacobs, in a ruling that dealt with this very specific issue, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically what he said was, we don't want laxer gun laws because we don't want a Wild West mentality. Now that's been the hue and cry of people who don't want firearms and personal protection all over the country. We have not seen that happen. But we're still talking about a state where possession of hollow point ammunition outside of a few specific caveats is a felony. So the ammunition that is standard for police officers and civilians alike across the country can get you thrown in prison in New Jersey, even if you're a police officer from another jurisdiction who comes in New York, right?
I know of a case where a New York police officer crossed into New Jersey, got stopped for traffic and whatever, but they discovered his duty gun with hollow point, or off-duty gun with hollow point ammunition, and they arrested him.
The long and the short is no one expects the Supreme Court of New Jersey to actually overturn this law or even loosen it up. This is one of those fights that's being had because then they can move on to the next level if they don't get what they want.
Yeah, they need to be turned down by the New Jersey state in order to appeal it into the federal system.
Correct.
Like the second case that's coming up now is already like a step ahead of that. But it's a slightly different case.
Just a little.
We're going to have to break for just a minute for some commercials. We'll be back right after this.
Giles Locksmith has been servicing Las Vegas and Henderson for 40 years. We're family owned and operated and provide 24-hour emergency residential, commercial, and automotive solutions. Instead of replacing, we can fix your problem, from key duplication to computer key programming. We have a wide variety of products, including the largest key selection, state-of-the-art security accessories, and safes by American Securities. Every team member carries their sheriff's card, so you can trust us when it matters most. Come to the castle. Giles Locksmith. Call us at 566-4363.
We are back here on Fired Up, picking up this case with the basically the gun owners of New Jersey trying to go after the federal government to see there will be a case that hits the Supreme Court from this, I'm sure.
I would expect so.
The question of where it's going to fall is the very scary thing here.
Yeah, the problem with this particular case is now we have what's called a circuit split. Whenever there's a unresolved question of law, and unfortunately the Supreme Court left open a lot of territory in the Heller decision and the McDonald decision, and that's kind of their modus operandi. They never want to reach issues that weren't part of the core case. And so whether or not we have a right to self-defense outside of the House is the open question. Right. The Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, this is the famous Moore v. Madigan case out of Chicago, said, well, there's no point in having a self-defense right if you can't defend yourself where you spend the majority of your time. Therefore, not having a manner to allow carry of firearms is a violation of the Second Amendment. The Third Circuit Court of Appeals on the 31st, this is a brand new decision, ruled virtually the opposite. Now the difference between the two is that New Jersey does have a system to get a CCW. It's just that regular humans don't qualify. And that's kind of common in a lot of places. You know, California has a system to get carry permits, but if you look at the state of California, it's hit and miss whether or not the county you're in actually has any. New Jersey has the standard we talked about, which is justifiable need. And in the federal case, the three-judge panel, the two judges who were the prevailing opinion, which is no, you don't have an absolute right to self-defense, went into a lot of discussion about what is justifiable need. They talked about imminent danger to you, verifiable. They talked about the history of New Jersey, the concern that life would be bad if everybody walked around with a gun. We'd be the Wild West again. But they said a couple of things that I think is where the Supreme Court's going to step into this. When federal appeals courts, whenever there's a governmental interest that's taken to the courts, the court has to ask itself first what level of scrutiny applies. There's rational basis scrutiny, which is there a good reason for the law? And if there is, then it's legal. There's intermediate scrutiny, which is basically, is there a good reason for the government to have this law that doesn't really infringe on everybody's right? Core constitutional privileges have almost always been strict scrutiny. To pass a strict scrutiny, they must show that it is the least restrictive means possible to protect a compelling governmental interest. So we just want to keep the crime rate down would be intermediate scrutiny. Strict scrutiny would be if we don't prohibit this from happening, anarchy will reign, and they can't get there. So the court used intermediate scrutiny. They also said something that every first-year attorney hears at some point. There's a concept called stare decisis. Courts don't want to disturb previous opinions. And so they'll say, well, we're standing on the history. It's a long-standing right, and therefore it is presumptively lawful. The problem with that is when you look at something that deals with constitutional rights, and you say, well, we've been violating it for 80 years, therefore it's lawful,
okay.
it's okay.
Sure.
The classic example of that is Korematsu v. U.S. This is the case that came out of the internment during World War II. Now, it's still good law. The court did not say that that was unconstitutional. It said we shouldn't have done that, but it didn't say it was unconstitutional. So based upon the theory of the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, the government could round up any group of people that they want to and inter them in prison camps indefinitely and then say, well, it's presumptively constitutional and legal because Korematsu's still the law of the land.
Did this group have to bomb Pearl Harbor first, or
You know what?
just anybody? We
That's
don't know.
the problem. We don't know.
Please. I don't believe you just said that.
The simple answer is, contrary to Randy's disbelief there, it's not a question of what they have to do. It's a question of, is the law so important that we'll allow this broad discretion?
Right.
And following Moore v. Madigan, the Seventh Circuit has clearly said, no, you have a right to carry outside your home. The state must come up with a scheme to issue these permits. It's in direct contravention. Although here's the real question. The Seventh Circuit basically said you can't have no permits. That was Illinois, the last state in the union to actually have a permit scheme. They said, Illinois, by this date, come up with a system where we're going to do it for you. So Illinois went out and came up with a system. What nobody knows is, could Illinois have come up with a New Jersey system and the courts would have said, well, now you got a way, that's good enough. Because that's basically what's going on in D.C. and basically what goes on in New York City. And those jurisdictions haven't been struck down yet or even been taken to the courts over this issue. So this is going to be a really interesting argument. The dissent in this particular case, by the way, and the dissenting judge was a visiting judge. They had him sit on the panel because they couldn't put the standard 3-judge panel together. He said, those guys got it wrong. They got it absolutely wrong. They keep referring to these laws from 1924 and 1971 and 1966, and they have no bearing.
Fight him back.
Yeah, no, he probably won't sit with them again. So this is a 2-1 split. It wasn't unanimous. The appellants have a couple of options here. Now they can just go and try to get cert to the Supreme Court right away, or more likely the first step is they will ask for an en banc hearing. I don't have any real hope because this appellate court has been the strictest, most anti-gun appellate court out there.
Of course.
For its entire existence. So it makes the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals sometimes look rational on guns. And so this is going to be a long, drawn-out process. If it is picked up by the Supreme Court, it's not going to happen within 2 years probably. It'll have to be writted, and then if they take it next term, they'll hear the arguments after October when they go back into session, and the decision won't happen until sometime late next year.
Not good. This is a very, very scary case. I can see that if New Jersey is able to maintain their position on their laws, we have New York that'll do the same thing, and probably Colorado if it doesn't split into two states between now and then. There's
In New York, it's, I mean, I still have my New York permit, a pistol permit, and you have to have a concealed weapon permit in order to even buy a handgun. You have to have the permit before you buy the gun, actually. And my permit still, it's good for life. My father-in-law brought a gun back from Belgium, World War II, and the picture on his permit is in his World War II uniform. And, but it says right on the permit, not valid in New York City. So New York City is the cutoff line. Everything above New York is okay, below.
And I've always wondered if they prevail in New Jersey, I would not be surprised if we don't have some kind of an action under an equal protection claim. You know, everybody else in New York State can get a permit fairly easily by going to their local chief of police and saying, I have a need. But in the city, it's really still a power issue. You have to be a somebody or have connections to get it.
There's two types. There's a premise permit and a carry permit. So you even have to have one to have one in your premises, a permit.
Yeah.
It's really,
a permit to possess a pistol.
And those are the permits that newspaper was publishing the location of all of those. They were premises permits. These people in the county have the right to have a firearm. They also published the list of people who could carry a gun out in public.
My list, my permit, I looked it up. Because there was no activity since 2010 on my permit. All it has is my name and everything. But everybody in New York, I can go right on the computer right now and find out who has a concealed weapon permit in the state. If you've had any activity on your permit, if you bought or sold a gun since 2010, then your name, your address, all your information is right there available to anybody. Right on, it's amazing.
A different issue, but this gets just more and more complicated. As everybody out there knows, that Illinois is forced now to issue concealed carry permits, and their system there is there's a board of police chiefs, sort of like in Nevada, that sets what those laws are in general. And the issue came up to them a week and a half ago that, well, what do we do now that we theoretically have permits? They don't have any actual yet, but what do we do with people coming through from other states? And part of the federal decree was that they would honor other states' permits. So what that law enforcement group decided was that people coming through Illinois from out of state could carry their loaded pistols in their car. But if they step out of the car, the gun has to stay in the car in a locked container that meets their state standard for a locked container in a car. So they can only have their pistol while they're in the car, and if they step out anywhere in the state of Illinois, they can't. That was the ruling for 48 hours. I almost gave it to you on a class note, and the Illinois Attorney General overruled that somehow and said, we're not going to do that. So now they're back to where they were. But for one brief period, you could have driven through Illinois with your gun in your car. I'm sorry you missed it.